The summer of 1462 was a season straight out of hell. 20,000 rotting corpses, nailed to stakes like grotesque scarecrows, surrounded the city of Târgoviște. Their skin peeled and sagged under the sun, bellies split open, eyes plucked out by birds, tongues stiff in eternal screams. The heat made their flesh bubble and reek until the smell itself became a weapon. Hardened Ottoman soldiers, men who had slaughtered in the name of empire, gagged and vomited before they even saw the bodies. Clouds of flies rose into the air like black smoke, buzzing so thick they almost blotted out the sky. Sultan Mehmed II, yes, the same Mehmed who had crushed Constantinople, who had laughed as the Byzantine Empire bled out, pulled his horse to an abrupt stop. The iron-blooded conqueror, undefeated and untouchable, turned pale as chalk. His generals watched, their invincible leader suddenly trembling, staring out at a nightmare only one man could have arranged. The corpses were not random. No, this wasn't chaos. This was design. Turkish prisoners, Ottoman soldiers, men who had sworn loyalty to Mehmed's own banner, had been stripped of humanity and turned into a message written in rotting flesh. Each stake was measured to the exact same height, each body set at the same grotesque level. Circles within circles, the stakes formed a pattern so mathematically precise, it mocked the living. This wasn't madness. Madness would have been merciful. This was method, and it got worse. As Mehmed squinted through the haze of death, his eyes found something chilling. Certain bodies had been positioned deliberately, the way one arranges letters on a page. From above, the corpses spelled words in Arabic, personal words, words only someone from inside the Ottoman palace could have known. His stomach dropped. This was no random butcher. This was personal. The Sultan knew exactly who had created this field of horror, and worse, he knew why. To understand how a Christian prince turned into humanity's most methodical torturer, you have to rewind 20 years to an 11-year-old boy trembling in marble hallways. His name was Vlad, son of Vlad II Dracula. History would rename him Vlad the Impaler. But before he built forests of death, before he dined among the dying, he was just a child learning one rule. In the Ottoman palace, the only way to survive was to surrender, or become something far worse than your tormentors could imagine. It was 1442 when the boy's nightmare began. Vlad had been in Mehmed's palace for just 3 months, long enough to understand the rhythm of captivity. Mornings filled with Turkish lessons and theology. Afternoons with lessons in etiquette, how to bow, how to serve, how to hide defiance. But when the sun went down, the real education began. Vlad and his younger brother Radu weren't honored guests, no matter what silk robes and golden plates suggested. They were hostages, flesh and blood insurance that their father would bend to Ottoman expansion. The guards came for them every night. At first, Vlad resisted. He fought like a cornered wolf, clawing, screaming, biting until they pinned him down. But resistance didn't work. Soon enough, he learned to walk on his own feet into the darkness. Cooperation meant less pain. His brother Radu, only 9 years old, learned a different tactic. He laughed, he charmed, he adapted. Even as children, they chose opposite roads. Vlad through rage, Radu through compliance. The Ottomans had a tradition with their noble hostages. Officially, boys were educated. Unofficially, the prettier ones were taken for other purposes. And Vlad, pale-skinned and sharp-featured, was considered a prize. What they did to him at night was not recorded in polite chronicles, but the echoes bled through his every cruelty as an adult. The worst wasn't the pain. Pain heals. The worst was the brainwashing. Every act of abuse was sold as an honor. You are chosen, they told him. This is love. This is devotion. Safety was submission. Violation was loyalty. Protection meant surrender. A child's mind twisted until the only truth was that power belonged to whoever controlled your body. There was always music playing in those perfumed chambers, soft Turkish melodies to mask the sounds. Later in life, when Vlad banned music from his court, his nobles thought it was a pious gesture. They had no idea he was silencing the soundtrack of his own torture. So young Vlad learned his first rule of survival: escape into the mind. While his body was broken, he drifted upward, watching from the ceiling, a detached spectator studying power like an architect studies blueprints. The guards thought they were creating a compliant puppet prince. They had no idea they were crafting a monster. 6 years he endured it. 6 years of days filled with polite lessons and nights filled with horrors. Polite society never admitted aloud. His brother Radu found protection in Mehmed's favor. Becoming his beloved companion, Vlad found nothing but rage, storing every humiliation, memorizing every detail, never forgetting, never forgiving. By his 6th year in the palace, Vlad had grown taller, stronger, his voice cracking into manhood. He was no longer interesting prey, so they tried to break him physically instead. They brought in a polished wooden pole, carefully shaped, surgically precise. They would show him what it meant to be powerless. That same instrument would later become his signature, a weapon of methodical cruelty that turned his name into legend. Vlad the Impaler. But the true birth of Vlad Dracula came the night the footsteps passed him by. They didn't come for him, they came for Radu. That was the night Vlad learned something worse than torture, being abandoned, being forgotten, being nothing. And he swore, fists pressed to marble until they bled, that he would never, ever be powerless again. The Ottoman palace was built to divide, and no one knew that better than the Dracula brothers. They had arrived together, hostages clinging to each other like orphans, whispering prayers in Romanian when no one listened. But the system was designed to split loyalties like a butcher splits bone. And it worked. Radu was 9, soft, delicate, with a beauty that chroniclers later described as angelic, though the truth was uglier. Where Vlad's face was all sharp angles and fury, Radu's was smooth, almost glowing, like marble carved for admiration. His eyes reflected whatever you wanted to see. Innocence, charm, surrender. He was a survivalist in silk. The Ottoman court recognized it instantly. Vlad was a wild horse to be broken. Radu was a songbird to be trained. His handlers weren't brutes, they were gardeners. They watered him with kindness, fed him with flattery, taught him how to wield beauty as a weapon. Smile and they'll protect you. Submit and you'll be rewarded. It wasn't domination, it was seduction. And Radu learned fast. By age 11, he had caught the eye of the Sultan's son himself, young Mehmed, the boy who would one day become Mehmed the Conqueror. Only a few years older, but in the palace hierarchy, he was untouchable, godlike. And gods take what they want. Mehmed claimed Radu as his companion. Protection? Yes. Safety from predators? Yes. But also no escape from one. Here's where the records hide behind euphemism. Ottoman chronicles call them intimate companions. European writers are more blunt. Radu became the Sultan's boy, and unlike Vlad, who experienced his nights as violation, Radu was groomed to experience his as love. Mehmed wrote him poetry, promised him titles, stroked his hair, told him he was chosen. Imagine the corruption, affection wrapped around abuse, sweetness rotting at the core. Vlad, of course, saw only betrayal, his brother draped in silk, walking with jewels, smiling at the very monsters who had broken him. Each time he saw Radu's delicate laughter echo through the palace halls, it was a dagger twisting in his gut. To Vlad, it wasn't survival, it was treason. By their 3rd year in captivity, the chasm between them was a canyon. They passed in corridors without speaking. Radu, the pampered darling, converting to Islam, earning the name Radu Bey. Vlad, the scarred, smoldering hostage, plotting revenge in silence. The real fracture came in 1447. News arrived like a blade. Their father, Vlad II Dracula, had been murdered. 16-year-old Vlad received it as prophecy. Trust no one. Love is weakness. Power is the only truth. His rage hardened into resolve, escape, revenge, a kingdom carved out of blood. But 13-year-old Radu? He collapsed into Mehmed's arms. His Ottoman family became his only family. He converted fully, clung tighter to the very system that had chained them. To him, survival meant surrender. To Vlad, survival meant becoming a nightmare. Here's the cruelest twist. Psychology today calls Radu's reaction normal. Trauma bonds, Stockholm syndrome. Children forced into abuse often confuse control for care, intensity for intimacy. Radu wasn't weak. He was a child surviving the only way he could. But Vlad didn't see psychology. He saw betrayal. He saw treason. The workshop smelled of oil, blood, and freshly cut wood. Vlad stood among his craftsmen like a king among priests, except their religion was pain. 50 stakes lined the walls, each one carved to his exact specifications. These weren't weapons of war. They were instruments of art designed for screaming. Too sharp, Vlad said, tossing aside a prototype. A sharp point killed too quickly. That was mercy. Mercy was sin. The point must be dull. Let the body slide slowly. Let death crawl, not strike. The woodworkers glanced at each other, sweating, but obeyed. They had expected to build fortifications, palisades, towers. Instead, they were carving Vlad's signature, forests of impalement. Vlad ran his hands across the smooth oak, measuring, calculating. He wanted angles that avoided the vital organs. A stake must push the body aside, not pierce straight through. That way the victim stayed alive, days, sometimes a week, while gravity dragged them down inch by inch. It was not murder. It was slow-motion anatomy. The finishing touch was oil, every stake soaked until slick, not to preserve the wood. Number, to make the flesh slide. Penetration was smoother than puncture. That false gentleness was part of the cruelty. The body accepted the stake at first, only to realize it had become its own executioner. And then the testing began. Prisoners dragged from dungeons, stripped, and handed to Vlad like meat for a butcher. He watched each impalement like a scientist. Too steep. Adjust the base. Too quick. Round the edge more, notes scribbled in blood and memory. The first screams shook the workshop, but Vlad didn't flinch. He leaned forward, eyes fixed, breath shallow, like a man reliving something personal. Sometimes he whispered words in Turkish under his breath. The craftsmen didn't understand them, but the words made Vlad's hands tremble with fury. When the stake went in at the perfect angle, Vlad smiled. A dull point between the buttocks, sliding carefully past organs, catching every nerve. The victim convulsed, but the bleeding was minimal. Consciousness remained. Hours passed, then days, and the victim still screamed. The stakes multiplied, thin ones for women and children, thick, brutal ones for warriors and nobles, medium stakes for merchants, priests, petty thieves. Each size matched to its victim like a tailor fitting clothes. Vlad wanted no waste, no improvisation. His cruelty was organized, but this wasn't just killing, it was theater. He arranged the impaled in patterns. Triangles for traitors, circles for prisoners of war. Sometimes he wrote messages with bodies, spelling words in the air with shrieking flesh. Entire villages became his stage. And Vlad didn't just order executions. He dined among them, his throne dragged into the middle of the forest of stakes. Silver plates glinting, goblets of wine filled, as men, women, and children twisted and moaned around him. Closer, he once ordered, moving his table until he could reach out and touch a man's twitching feet. The victim was still alive, eyes rolling, throat gurgling. Vlad tore a piece of bread, dipped it in his wine, and chewed calmly as the man gasped beside him. His nobles sat with him, forced to endure the symphony of suffering. Some vomited, others fainted. Vlad? He savored every bite. He toasted his victims with mock laughter. Drink with me, my friends. Stay a while. One Ottoman ambassador lasted 3 days on the stake, his voice somehow intact. He prayed in Arabic, a steady chant, even as his body decayed. Vlad ordered him removed, cleaned, fed water, then re-impaled at a fresh angle so the chant would continue. Sing, Vlad commanded. And the ambassador sang, his voice breaking only when his lungs filled with blood. But Vlad's cruelty wasn't only for soldiers. Women accused of adultery faced a different punishment. Heated stakes, red hot, hissing as they entered. Vlad called it purification. Their screams carried across the city, lessons for every wife, every daughter. Their bodies blackened, but Vlad's face never softened. Children weren't spared. He had stakes carved thinner for their small frames. Parents were forced to watch. Sometimes he reversed it. Children impaled before their mother's eyes. The cruelty wasn't just physical, it was psychological, designed to rip apart families as completely as flesh. Vlad turned torture into bureaucracy. Crime matched to stake. Treason, adultery, theft, blasphemy, each had its own design. Each punishment a precise reflection of the prince's obsession. He wasn't content to kill. He wanted the entire world to read his message in blood and wood, and the world read it. The Turks called him Kazikli Bey, the Impaler Prince. He liked the title. He deserved it. He earned it with every body that slid down oak, with every scream that echoed through the night, with every drop of blood soaking the soil until the earth itself became a graveyard. This wasn't random savagery. This was architecture. This was Vlad's kingdom built on pain. Every smile Radu gave their captors was another scar etched into Vlad's soul. Every silken robe, every affectionate glance at Mehmed was proof, at least in Vlad's mind, that his brother had chosen the abusers. And if Radu could laugh here, if Radu could find comfort here, then what did that make Vlad's resistance? Futile? Stupid? That question festered until it turned into hatred. Years later, when the brothers met again on the battlefield, it wasn't hatred that cut Vlad the deepest. It was pity. Radu, by then a polished Ottoman general, looked at Vlad's cruelty not as strength, but as sickness. He pitied the brother who couldn't move past his pain, who weaponized every memory instead of burying it. And pity was gasoline on Vlad's fire, because pity meant Radu saw through him. Pity meant Radu remembered the broken boy, and Vlad would rather drown the world in blood than let anyone see the child again. Radu had chosen peace through surrender. Vlad had chosen rage through resistance, and history proved rage was a much sharper tool. The cauldron stood in the courtyard, a monstrous copper pot forged to Vlad's exact design, wide enough for 3 men, fitted with a heavy lid drilled with holes the size of necks. The fit had to be perfect. Too wide, and the victims drowned too quickly. Too narrow, and the neck snapped before the boiling even began. Vlad had spent months perfecting this device. Death was not the goal. Suffering was. 3 Byzantine merchants were chosen for the first trial. Tax cheats, liars, thieves. They were stripped naked, their heads shoved through the holes until they protruded like grotesque flowers. Faces pale and terrified, bodies dangling inside the pot. Beneath them, fires roared. Vlad watched as the water climbed from warmth to heat, from heat to agony. At first the men gasped, then they screamed, throats ripping with raw sound. Steam scalded their faces, blistering their skin. The courtyard echoed with the sound of flesh cooking, a nauseating hiss mixed with shrieks. Vlad wasn't satisfied with just boiling them. He had their fraudulent documents, their coins, their stolen property thrown into the cauldron with them. They stewed in their own corruption, literally dissolved in the proof of their crimes. And their families? They weren't spared. Vlad forced wives, children, and servants to line up with long ladles, stirring the pot as if preparing stew. Their tears mixed with the rising steam, but refusal meant joining the merchants in the water. Every person present became a participant in the execution, bound to it forever. When the merchants' throats could no longer scream, only gurgle, Vlad leaned forward, watching the skin peel from their faces. The eyes bulge, the lips curl back from bone. He studied it like a scholar. He wanted to see exactly when flesh ceased to be flesh and became meat. But boiling wasn't enough. The bodies were left inside until they dissolved into sludge. That sludge was scraped from the cauldron, collected in bowls, and used again. Some prisoners were forced to eat it. Others had it smeared into their wounds. It wasn't punishment, it was contamination, forcing victims to become part of each other's torment. The cauldron was just one invention. Vlad also favored the goats. Prisoners tied to wooden frames, their bare feet washed in warm water and coated with thick salt. Then the goats were led forward. Their rough tongues rasped against the salted flesh, at first tickling, then tearing, layer by layer. The first hour victims laughed. By the third they screamed. The tongues wore through skin, licked raw nerves until feet became shredded meat. The goats kept licking, patient, relentless. Victims begged to be impaled just to end the torment. Vlad sat beside them, sipping wine, listening to the transition from laughter to agony as though it were music. Sometimes he added honey to the salt. Sometimes he brought in the goats' kids, smaller tongues for softer torture. The licking never stopped until flesh was gone and bone showed through. Fire was another favorite. Adulterous women stripped naked, tied down, and lowered onto heated stakes. The wood hissed as it entered, searing shut the wounds even as it split them open. Vlad called it purification. Their screams tore through the city, reminders to every wife and daughter that their bodies belonged to him, and him alone. Nobles who betrayed him met grander ends. Vlad had their heads forced through iron mass, glowing red hot, clamped tight until skin fused with metal. Others were skinned alive, strips of flesh hung like banners from the castle walls. And when Vlad grew bored of pain, he made punishment into spectacle. Forests of impaled men and women rose around villages, arranged in patterns visible from miles away. Circles, spirals, even words spelled out in bodies. Travelers gagged at the smell long before they reached the borders of his land. For Vlad, executions were not justice. They were messages. Villagers starved but didn't dare steal. Nobles plotted but didn't dare whisper. Every stake was a warning. every scream a proclamation, and Vlad never tired of hearing them. The Easter feast of 1459 was no banquet. It was a performance staged in blood. Vlad's long table gleamed with silver and crystal, but the real centerpieces were the victims writhing on stakes. Hundreds of men and women impaled outside the palace, their bodies twisting in the spring wind. The prince sat at the head, cutting meat, sipping wine, and watching his guests, the ones nailed upright in wood, not the cowards seated beside him. "Closer," he ordered, pointing at a merchant still twitching on his stake. Guards dragged the man's pole toward Vlad's table until the prince could reach out and brush his trembling feet. The man gasped, eyes wide, mouth frothing with blood. Vlad smiled, tore a hunk of bread, and dipped it in his wine. Around him, nobles tried not to retch as screams blended with the clink of cutlery. Vlad didn't just eat among the dying. He dined with them. He toasted them. He listened to their gasps as if they were conversation. One Ottoman ambassador lasted longer than most. He had once refused to remove his turban in Vlad's presence. Now he hung on a stake, throat ripped raw, yet still able to speak. He recited prayers in Arabic, words sacred in Constantinople, but here they curdled into mockery. Vlad leaned forward, wine glass trembling in his grip. He ordered the ambassador carefully pulled from his stake, patched just enough to live, and then re-impaled at a fresh angle. "Sing," Vlad commanded. "Sing until your voice breaks." And so the man sang, a dying hymn that became the soundtrack of Vlad's feast. But the ambassador was not the only one to suffer prolonged agony. Vlad reserved special cruelties for women. Adulteresses stripped bare before the court, their families forced to watch. He ordered red-hot steaks prepared, glowing like brands. Guards spread the women wide and lowered them slowly, screaming onto the burning wood. The hissing was louder than their cries. Their flesh sealed as it split, blackening as smoke filled the hall. Vlad called it cleansing fire. If the women resisted, if they dared defy him with silence instead of begging, Vlad handled them himself. He studied their faces, waiting for the moment of collapse. The precise second defiance turned into broken desperation. Only then did he smile. Children fared no better. For petty crimes, stealing bread, disobedience, speaking out, he had thin stakes carved just for them. Small bodies wriggled like grotesque dolls, their screams higher, sharper, cutting across the fields. Parents were chained nearby, forced to watch. Some fainted. Others begged to take their children's place. Vlad refused. The parents' punishment was the watching, and the feast continued. Plates heavy with meat, goblets brimming with wine, all served in the middle of his forests of agony. Vlad raised toasts to the dying, thanking them for their company. His soldiers whispered that he ate more slowly during these meals, savoring every bite, chewing in rhythm with the victims' death rattles. But not all tortures used wood and fire. Vlad was creative. He ordered prisoners flayed alive, strips of skin peeled carefully with knives until the air itself burned their exposed nerves. He had their skins nailed to the city gates as warnings. Others he boiled in giant cauldrons, their heads forced through iron collars while their bodies cooked beneath them. He added their belongings to the water, coins, letters, stolen goods, so that they literally stewed in their own corruption. For nobles, he favored iron masks heated until they glowed red. These were clamped onto the victim's head, searing flesh into metal. The smell of roasting skin lingered in the halls for days, and for thieves and liars he had mouths stuffed with hot coals. Their lips blistered, their tongues swelled, until their screams turned into wet choking. Every punishment was staged. Vlad didn't just kill, he displayed, he arranged. He forced others to watch, to participate, to remember. The forests of impaled corpses rotted slowly, filling the air with a stench so thick travelers covered their faces with cloth. Birds feasted on eyes, dogs gnawed dangling limbs. But the stakes never stopped rising. Each crime, each betrayal, each insult was answered with another body, another scream nailed upright against the sky. This was not justice. This was not order. This was brutality refined into spectacle. Vlad made pain into architecture. He made suffering into ceremony. And every scream, every hiss of burning flesh, every gurgle of a drowning throat was music to his feast. The dungeons of Târgoviște stank of rot and whetstone, but Vlad's true horrors weren't hidden underground. He dragged them into daylight, into the squares, into the fields where the air filled with screams. By his command, agony became theater. One of his most revolting entertainments involved mothers and their children. When a noblewoman dared to protest his taxes, he ordered her confined without food, but left water so she could linger in starvation. For 3 days she listened to her baby cry in another room, milk drying in her breasts, stomach gnawing itself hollow. When they reunited her with the child, her relief curdled into despair, because Vlad had food prepared. Rich, steaming stews filled the chamber, the scent of meat and spice choking her hunger. She ate greedily until she realized what she had swallowed. Her child's body had been boiled into the meal. Her scream split the castle stone. Vlad did not kill her after. He released her, cursed to live with the taste still in her mouth. Cannibalism was not rare under his rule. Captives were forced to eat the flesh of their kin, cooked, raw, or mixed into bread. Some he smeared with gore and made them devour each other like starving animals while their families watched. Refusal brought the stake, but most broke long before that, mouths dripping red, eyes glazed with horror. Boiling pits became another spectacle. Giant cauldrons constructed to hold 3 or more at a time. Victims stripped, crammed inside, heads protruding through iron lids while their bodies cooked below. Vlad paced beside them, wine in hand, waiting for the bubbling flesh to blister and peel from bone. To prolong the torment, he ordered the fire adjusted, heat rising slowly, so death stretched out over hours. The smell of human stew hung heavy in the city, seeping into the walls, into the soil. Flaying was performed in public squares, prisoners tied upright, knives slicing skin from shoulders to feet. Strips hung like banners from their living bodies, blood streaming in rivers. He nailed their skins to gates, stretched across poles, left to dry in the sun while the flayed husks twitched until silence finally came. Animals were tools as well. Goats licked salted feet until raw. Dogs set loose to tear at bound prisoners, ripping bellies, dragging intestines across the mud while Vlad laughed. Once he coated a man in honey and left him staked in a field of insects. Flies, ants, and bees consumed him alive, buzzing and biting until his flesh was a crawling mass. For nobles and priests, he saved the iron masks, heated until they glowed red, clamped onto faces so flesh sizzled and fused with metal. The smell of cooking heads sickened even hardened soldiers. Others were crowned with iron cauldrons filled with burning coals, skulls popping like firewood in the flames. Some victims were sawn in half, hung upside down, legs spread, and cut from crotch to chest with 2 men pulling the saw. Gravity ensured they remained alive for most of the butchery, shrieking as their bodies split apart inch by inch. Blood poured onto the ground in torrents while Vlad watched with calm delight. Even death was not escape. Corpses were dismembered, genitals stuffed into mouths, intestines wrapped around necks like ropes. Heads were boiled, tarred, and spiked along city walls. Entire fields became oceans of rot, the smell of putrefaction rolling for miles. Warning strangers where Vlad ruled, but the worst were the forests of stakes, tens of thousands at a time. Soldiers, peasants, children, mothers impaled and arranged in grotesque patterns, circles, spirals, even words spelled out in flesh. The dying groaned for days, their moans mixing with the croak of crows that feasted on their eyes. The sky itself darkened with vultures. Blood ran into the soil until it stank sweeter than carrion. Travelers approaching his lands collapsed from the stench before they even saw the first body. The Turks named him Kazaklı Bey, the Lord Impaler, because every road into his domain was lined with corpses twisting on poles like grotesque milestones. This was not punishment, it was annihilation, a carnival of agony. Vlad didn't simply kill his enemies. He unmade them, flesh, bone, soul, until even death reeked of him. Wallachia was no longer a country, it was a carcass stretched across mountains and valleys. Fields didn't grow wheat, they sprouted corpses. Villages didn't ring with laughter, only the caw of black birds circling endless feasts of flesh. Every road was a gallery of agony. Merchants passed forests of impaled men, their bloated bodies swaying in the wind like obscene banners. Children learned to walk under skies black with vultures, wings beating as if the air itself rejected the land. Rivers ran red, choked with the waste of butchered bodies. The soil drank blood until it stank sweeter than rot. Nights were worse. The moans of the dying carried on the wind, mingling with the howls of wolves feasting at the base of stakes. Travelers gagged, unable to breathe without inhaling decay. Even silence carried weight, broken only by the creak of wood as corpses shifted in the breeze. Castles became slaughterhouses. Walls dripped with gore. Courtyards filled with bones. Every feast, every celebration, every prayer was drowned by the chorus of shrieks that never stopped. Even the strongest soldiers muttered that Vlad's land was cursed, that the devil himself had fled in disgust, leaving only the Impaler to rule in his place. And through it all, Vlad sat high in his fortress, watching from his tower as the forests of death stretched to the horizon. No crown of gold gleamed brighter than his crown of corpses. No monument lasted longer than his monuments of rot. Wallachia had no dawn, only endless dusk, painted in red, shadowed by stakes, haunted by screams that would echo long after the bodies fell. Here, terror was not just punishment, it was law, it was landscape, it was Vlad,